Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
In the silence between heartbeats, in the space between one breath and the next, time seems almost to stop. For the briefest of moments, we exist outside its relentless flow, suspended in an eternal now that stretches toward infinity. And then the heart beats again, the lungs fill with air, and we are reminded that we are creatures of time, bound to its passage, measured by its inevitable march toward our own ending. We count the years as they pass, mark the milestones of our brief existence, and eventually accept that our allotment of moments will come to an end, leaving only memories in the minds of those who knew us. Time is a strange concept when you think about it. For most of us, a single lifetime feels impossibly brief. We measure our existence in decades, perhaps a century, if fortune favors us. We watch seasons change, as see generations rise and fall, and ultimately accept that our time upon this spinning rock is but a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of existence. But in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, time takes on dimensions that the human mind struggles to comprehend. There are beings in the Warhammer 40,000 universe who have witnessed not merely centuries or millennia, but millions upon millions of years of galactic history. There are entities whose consciousness stretches back to the very birth of creation itself, predating stars and planets, predating life as we understand it, predating even the formation of the galaxy we call home. Tonight, we embark upon a journey through the annals of existence itself. We shall trace the threads of time backward through epochs so vast that human history becomes an insignificant footnote, a mere blink in the eye of beings who have watched civilizations rise and crumble into cosmic dust countless times over. We seek to answer a question that burns at the heart of every student of this dark universe. Who or what is truly the oldest living thing in Warhammer 40,000? The answer, as you shall discover, is far more complex and terrifying than any simple name or title could convey. For in this universe of horrors and wonders, immortality takes many forms. Some beings have endured since before time had meaning. Others have cheated death through technology so advanced it defies comprehension. Still others persist through sheer force of will, their consciousness transferred and preserved across endless millennia. And then there are those whose very existence warps the fundamental nature of reality, making questions of age and time almost meaningless when applied to them. Before we begin our descent into these depths of cosmic history, let us establish what we mean by living. This is no simple matter in a universe where mechanical constructs house the remnants of alien consciousnesses, where gods of pure emotion feast upon the psychic energies of mortal souls, and where the boundary between life and death has been blurred beyond recognition by sciences and sorceries alike. For our purposes tonight, we shall consider any conscious entity capable of thought, memory, and interaction with the material universe as living, regardless of the vessel that contains that consciousness. By this definition, a soul trapped within a mechanical shell for 10,000 years is no less alive than a flesh and blood warrior who drew breath yesterday. A god composed entirely of psychic energy and emotional resonance is no less real than the mortals whose fears and hatreds gave it birth. With this understanding in place, let us turn our gaze backward through time, past the current millennium of strife and suffering, past the age of the Imperium and its golden throne, past the rise and fall of civilizations beyond counting, to an era when the universe itself was young and the first stirrings of consciousness emerged from the primordial chaos of creation. The stars remember, even when all else has been forgotten. They witnessed the birth of time itself, or watched as the first subatomic particles danced their intricate patterns in the primordial fire, observed the slow cooling of cosmic plasma into the hydrogen clouds that would one day become galaxies. And in those earliest moments, when the universe was still finding its shape, something stirred in the nuclear hearts of these stellar giants. Consciousness flickered into existence, not in the organic sense we understand, but as patterns of electromagnetic force and thought, woven into the very fabric of stellar fusion. In the incomprehensible vastness of cosmic time, there exist beings for whom the formation of galaxies is a childhood memory, entities whose first conscious thoughts occurred when the universe was still cooling from the cataclysmic energies of its own birth. These are the Citan, the star gods, and by any rational measure, they represent the oldest truly living things in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Their existence stretches back not millions, not billions, but approximately 13 billion years, to the very dawn of creation itself. To understand the Citan, we must first understand the universe at its earliest moments. Picture, if you can, the state of reality approximately 13 billion years ago, according to the fragmentary records preserved by the Adeptus Mechanicus and the ancient Aeldari. The cosmos had just burst into existence in a churning mass of cataclysmic force, an explosion of energy so vast and so violent that it created space and time themselves. In that anarchic interweaving of matter and energy, the sea of stars began to swirl into existence, and for an eon, the universe was nothing more than hot hydrogen gas and light elemental dust ruled over by the gravitational force of billions of newborn suns. These first stars were nothing like the steady furnaces we know today. They were giants, monsters of nuclear fire that burned through their fuel in mere millions of years rather than the billions that modern stars enjoy. They blazed with furious intensity, their cores reaching temperatures and pressures that fused hydrogen into helium and helium into heavier elements, seeding the cosmos with the building blocks of future worlds. And in the hearts of these stellar furnaces, in the electromagnetic fields and plasma flows that gave them form, something unprecedented was happening. Long before the first planets had formed and cooled, long before anything resembling biological life had stirred in the cosmic soup, the very first truly self-aware beings emerged into the universe. Their thoughts were encased within the lines of force produced by the plasma and electromagnetic flares of the stars themselves. They were creatures of pure energy, vast and incomprehensible, spreading themselves across the surfaces of suns and feeding upon solar flares and magnetic storms. They had no physical form as we understand it. They were patterns of thought and awareness woven into the fabric of stellar phenomena. Consciousnesses so diffuse, they could span areas larger than whole planets. Imagine a mind that stretches from the core of a star to the outer reaches of its corona, a being whose thoughts move at the speed of light through magnetic field lines billions of kilometers long. As in those earliest days, the Citan were not the malevolent beings they would eventually become. They simply existed, drifting through the cosmos, feeding upon the energies of stars and contemplating the universe with minds utterly alien to anything biological. They had no concept of material life, no interest in the tiny specks of matter that would eventually coalesce into worlds. What could such beings care for rock and water, for carbon and oxygen? They were creatures of plasma and magnetism, of fusion fire and electromagnetic radiation. The universe was their garden, the stars their sustenance, and they desired nothing more than to continue their eternal feast across the heavens. After a time, as the first generation of stars began to die and collapse into supernova or fade into white dwarfs, the Citan learned to travel between the stellar giants that remained. They developed the ability to use diaphanous wings created from the universe's lines of electromagnetic force to travel from one star to another, continuing their consumption when their host star began to dim and die. Picture these ancient entities surfing on waves of radiation across the void between stars, drawn to the warmth and energy of new stellar hosts, eternal migrants in a universe that was still finding its final form. For billions of years, the Citan existed in this state of ethereal contentment. They watched as the first galaxies formed, as the primal chaos of creation slowly organized itself into the spiral arms and stellar nurseries we know today. They observed, without interest, as the first primitive life forms emerged on distant worlds. They're creatures so insignificant to their cosmic perspective that they barely registered as worthy of notice. The matter around them was so insubstantial that it did not even register to their voracious appetites. What was a planet to a being that fed upon the output of stars? What was biological life to an entity whose consciousness had formed before matter itself had fully stabilized into its current forms? But everything changed when the Satan encountered the Necrontyr. The Necrontyr were a species born under a hateful star, their home world bathed in radiation that condemned them to short, painful lives filled with suffering and early death. While other species enjoyed the gifts of longevity and health, the Necrontyr were cursed from birth, their bodies deteriorating from the moment of their creation. This cosmic injustice bred within them a profound bitterness, a resentment that would eventually shape the destiny of the entire galaxy. When the Necrontyr finally mastered interstellar travel and expanded across the stars, they brought their resentment with them. They discovered the Old Ones, an ancient species that had mastered the secrets of immortality, and in their jealousy and rage, the Necrontyr demanded that these secrets be shared. When the Old Ones refused, war was declared. But the Necrontyr could not hope to defeat foes who had been manipulating the fabric of reality since before their species had evolved from the primordial ooze of their irradiated homeworld. It was during this time of desperation that the Necrontyr discovered the Satan feeding upon the energies of their very sun. Yet the details of this first contact are lost to history, preserved only in fragmentary records and contradictory legends. Some accounts claim it was an accident, a chance discovery made by a stellar probe during the investigation of a dying star. The Book of Mournful Night, held under close guard in the Eldari Black Library's innermost sanctum, tells rather that the raw hatred the Necrontyr held as a species for the Old Ones sang out across space, acting as a beacon that the Satan could not ignore. Whatever the truth, the meeting between these two species would change the galaxy forever. The Necrontyr, recognizing the godlike power of these stellar entities, conceived a plan of terrible genius and horrifying consequence. They offered to build bodies for the Catan, vessels of living metal called necrodermis, that would allow the star gods to interact with the material universe in ways they had never before imagined. For the Satan, who had existed for billions of years as diffuse patterns of energy, the prospect of concentrated physical form was intoxicating. They agreed to the Necrontyr's proposal, and thousands of miles of energy creature were compressed into comparatively tiny bodies of living metal. The transformation was catastrophic and wonderful in equal measure. As the Cetan focused their consciousnesses and became ever more aware of their new mode of existence, they came to appreciate the pleasures available to beings of matter and the other realities of corporeal life. But more importantly, they discovered a new kind of sustenance that made their previous diet of stellar energies seem like thin gruel in comparison. The deliciously focused trickles of electromagnetic energy given off by the physical bodies of the Necrontyr all about them awakened a new hunger in the Satan, a craving for the life force of biological entities that would transform them from distant cosmic entities into active predators upon the galaxy's inhabitants. The first of the Satan to be incarnated in necrodermis was Azargarod, who would come to be known as the Nightbringer, a being born upon the very star where the Necrontyr first lived their brief, morbid lives. Upon manifesting across the incorporeal starlight bridge into its new body, the Nightbringer brought with it the curse of death itself. It fed upon the terror and suffering of the Necrontyr, slaughtering those who had brought it into being, consumed by an insatiable hunger for the life energies of mortal creatures. Only by the desperate pledges of servitude were the Necrontyr able to convince the Nightbringer that there were other species beyond number for it to destroy. Soon, other Satan were awakened and given physical form. Mephetran, who would become known as the Deceiver, outstripped all others in accumulating followers and devotees. using cunning and manipulation rather than brute force to achieve its goals. Each C'tan that was incarnated added to the terrible power at the Necrontyre's disposal, and soon the tide of the war against the Old Ones began to turn. But the price the Necrontyre paid for this alliance would prove to be beyond calculation. Yet the C'tan convinced the Necrontyre that true immortality could be theirs through a process called biotransference, the transfer of consciousness from biological bodies into mechanical vessels of living metal. What the C'tan did not reveal was that this process would strip the Necrontyre of their souls, their emotions, their very essence as living beings. As millions of Necrontyre entered the soul forges to be transformed, the C'tan feasted upon their life forces, growing stronger with each soul they consumed. The beings that emerged from biotransference were no longer Necrontyre. They were Necrons, soulless automatons bound to the will of their star god masters, immortal but empty, deathless but no longer truly alive. Today, the C'tan that once terrorized the galaxy exist only as shards, fragments of their former glory, imprisoned within tesseract labyrinths by the very Necrons they once enslaved. But even these shards possess power beyond mortal comprehension, and somewhere in the vast darkness of the galaxy, the true essence of these 13 billion-year-old entities still endures, waiting perhaps for the day when they might be made whole again. Before the C'tan were given physical form, before the Necrontyre first looked upon the stars with envious eyes, another species had already risen to dominate the galaxy. They were known as the Old Ones, and their civilization reached its height in excess of 60 million standard years ago, making them the second oldest intelligent presence in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The Old Ones were a reptilian species, possessed of a slow, the cold-blooded wisdom that allowed them to study the stars and raise astrology and astronomy to an arcane science. They were the first race to cross the sea of stars, the first to establish a galactic civilization, the first to truly understand the nature of the universe and bend it to their will. Their understanding of reality was so profound that they could manipulate alternate dimensions, crafting the webway, a network of tunnels through the Imperium that allowed them to travel to far-flung worlds without suffering from the tides of the warp. With a single step through these portals, the Old Ones could traverse distances that would take conventional vessels centuries to cross. Such was their advanced science that they had the capacity to reshape worlds according to their predetermined environmental and geographic criteria. But they believed that all life was useful, and they are known to have brought about the rise of numerous new species, seeding intelligent life across thousands of worlds that they made their own. It is believed by some in the Adeptus Mechanicus that even Terra, humanity's birth world, felt the Old One's touch long before mankind's rise to self-awareness, though this notion is considered heretical at best by the ecclesiarchy. The Old Ones were responsible for the creation or genetic advancement of most of the currently active intelligent species of the galaxy. The Aeldari, those graceful and psychically gifted beings who would one day rule an empire spanning the stars, were shaped by Old One manipulation. The Krork, the savage precursors to the modern orcs, were engineered as warrior beasts to fight in the Old One's wars. The Slan, yet the Jokaero, and countless other species owe their existence to the guiding hand of these ancient architects of life. But for all their wisdom and power, the Old Ones made one fatal mistake. When the Necrontyre came to them seeking the secrets of immortality, the Old Ones refused. Perhaps they saw the bitterness and resentment that poisoned the Necrontyre's soul, and feared what such a species might do with eternal life. Perhaps they simply did not believe the Necrontyre were worthy of such gifts. Whatever their reasoning, this refusal would cost them everything. The war in heaven, as this conflict came to be known, raged across the galaxy for millions of years. At first, the Old Ones dominated, their mastery of the warp and their genetically engineered warrior races proving more than a match for the Necrontyre's conventional forces. But when the C'tan entered the war, the balance of power shifted catastrophically. Planets were razed, suns were extinguished, and whole systems were devoured by black holes, summoned by the reality-bending powers of the star gods. The Old Ones, for all their ancient wisdom, found themselves facing extinction. In desperation, the Old Ones accelerated their programs of genetic manipulation, creating new species specifically designed to fight the Necrons and their Citan masters. The Aeldari were enhanced and weaponized, their latent psychic abilities amplified to devastating effect. Other races were hastily designed and released upon the galaxy as living weapons. But even these measures could not stem the tide. The warp itself was corrupted by the psychic energies unleashed during the war, transformed from a relatively calm dimension into the roiling sea of chaos and predatory intelligences we know today. The Old Ones were destroyed, their civilization erased from the galaxy so thoroughly that little more than legends and ruins remain to mark their passing. But their legacy endures in the species they created and the corrupted warp they left behind. In many ways, the current state of the galaxy, with its warring factions and endless conflicts, can be traced back to the decisions made by the Old Ones 60 million years ago. Whether any Old Ones survived the war in heaven remains one of the greatest mysteries of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Some fragmentary records suggest that a few may have escaped into the deepest reaches of the webway or fled to pocket dimensions beyond the reach of their enemies. If such survivors exist, they would be the oldest biological entities in the galaxy, predating even the Citan's incarnation in Necrodermis by millions of years. But if they still live, they have hidden themselves so completely that no trace of their existence has been found in all the millennia since the war's conclusion. When the war in heaven finally ended, and the Citan had consumed or destroyed all that could be consumed or destroyed, the Necrons found themselves masters of a ruined galaxy. But their triumph was hollow, a victory that tasted of ashes and despair. For they had won everything and lost what mattered most. Their souls had been devoured by the very gods they had helped create, leaving them as nothing more than mechanical shells animated by the fading echoes of consciousness. Where once they had been a people capable of love and hate, of joy and sorrow, of all the complex emotions that define sentient existence, now they were machines, sophisticated machines, capable of thought and planning, but machines nonetheless, their capacity for feeling reduced to pale shadows of what organic life took for granted. The silent king Sarek, ruler of the Triarch and architect of the biotransference that had doomed his people, looked upon what remained of the galaxy and understood that the Necrons' time was not yet at hand. He stood amidst the ruins of civilizations beyond counting, surveyed a cosmos scarred by weapons that had extinguished stars and shattered worlds, and felt only the cold weight of regret where his heart had once been. He had led his people to immortality, yes, but it was an immortality of the grave, as a deathless existence that offered no possibility of renewal or change. The young races created by the Old Ones, particularly the Aeldari, had grown powerful during the war, their psychic abilities making them formidable opponents even for the advanced technology of the Necrons. These new species teemed across the galaxy, filling the ecological niches left vacant by the destruction of the war, their populations expanding even as the Necrons surveyed their hollow victory. With their forces exhausted and their spirits broken, the Necrons could not hope to establish dominion over the galaxy in their current state. They would need time to recover, time to rebuild, time for their enemies to weaken and decline. And so Sarek made a decision that would echo through 60 million years of history. He ordered the Great Sleep. Yeah, imagine the scale of this undertaking. Across the galaxy, on tomb worlds beyond counting, millions upon millions of Necrons withdrew into stasis crypts and sealed themselves away from the universe. Entire dynasties, civilizations that had once spanned stellar empires, powered down their systems and entered a sleep that would last longer than most species would exist. Their machine slaves and constructs were set to guard them while they slumbered, waiting for the day when the Aeldari would decline and the galaxy would be ripe for conquest once more. It was a gamble of almost incomprehensible scale, trusting that their ancient technology would preserve them across epochs so vast that evolution itself would reshape the galaxy's inhabitants multiple times over. Continents would drift on worlds throughout the galaxy. Stars would be born. Earths would live their entire lives and would die while the Necrons slept. Species that did not yet exist would rise to intelligence, build civilizations, decline, and be forgotten, all while the tomb worlds maintained their silent vigils. 60 million years. The number is almost beyond human comprehension. Our entire species has existed for only a tiny fraction of that span. Written history covers merely the last 5,000 years or so. Yet the Necrons were planning to sleep for 12,000 times that length. But before Zarek joined his people in their endless slumber, he took two final actions that would shape the course of galactic history. First, he led the Necrons in one last war, a revolt against the Citan that had enslaved and devoured his species. It was a war of vengeance, yes, but also a war of liberation. Baal for 60 million years had not dimmed Sarek's memory of what the star gods had done to his people. They had promised immortality and delivered damnation. They had offered power and taken souls. They had transformed a proud civilization into an army of automata, and for this crime, there could be no forgiveness. Using weapons of unimaginable power, hypercannons devised by the finest cryptex in the galaxy, and powered by the focused energies of the living universe itself, the Necrons shattered their former masters into countless fragments. The Citan, for all their cosmic power, had never anticipated this betrayal. They had grown complacent, drunk on the souls they had consumed, confident that their Necron servants were too diminished to pose any threat. They discovered their error in flames of annihilation that blazed across the galaxy. As these Citan shards were imprisoned within tesseract labyrinths, extra-dimensional prisons from which not even a star god could escape, to be used as weapons in future conflicts rather than served as masters. It was a fitting irony. The beings that had enslaved the Necrontyr would themselves become slaves, bound in chains of physics-defying technology, forced to serve those they had once dominated. Zarek had given his people their revenge, though he knew it could never truly balance the scales of what had been lost. Second, Zarek destroyed the command protocols that had given him absolute control over the entire Necron race. This act requires some explanation, for it seems counterintuitive that a ruler would voluntarily give up such power. During the biotransference, Zarek had been imbued with command matrices that allowed him to control every Necron in existence. With a thought, he could direct the actions of millions, could override individual will and impose his own purposes upon the entire species. It was a power that would have made him the most absolute tyrant in galactic history. But Zarek recognized this power for what it was. Another chain binding his people. Another form of slavery replacing the one they had just thrown off. He freed his people from his tyranny, ensuring that when they awoke, each Necron who still retained sentience would once more be in control of his own destiny. This act of abdication was partly penance for the curse he had unleashed upon his species. But it was also a recognition that the Necrons could only hope to reclaim their former glory if they were led by those who had earned their loyalty, rather than commanded it through technological bondage. And then Zarek did something no other Necron has ever done. Rather than enter the Great Sleep with his people, he exiled himself from the galaxy entirely. Aboard a massive planet-sized sepulchral engine, accompanied by legions of his own Sarachan dynasty in stasis crypts, the Silent King departed into the void of intergalactic space, there to find whatever measure of solace or penance he could. Consider what this means. Zarek voluntarily chose to spend 60 million years in the emptiness between galaxies, alone with his thoughts and his guilt, the sole waking mind in an entourage of sleeping servants. For 60 million years, he wandered the darkness between galaxies, carrying with him the full weight of what he had done to his people. He was the only Necron to completely remember his past and time as an organic life form, suffering the memories of his folly across epochs that would have destroyed the minds of any lesser being. He remembered what it felt like to be flesh and blood, to feel the warmth of his homeworld's hateful sun upon his skin, to experience the full range of emotions that biotransference had stolen from his people. And he carried these memories as a punishment, a constant reminder of what his decisions had cost. The Silent King's return to the galaxy came in 744 M41, prompted by his discovery of a threat that exceeded even the horrors of the war in heaven. In the vast emptiness between galaxies, Zarek encountered the Tyranids, an extragalactic species of such voracious appetite that they threatened to consume every scrap of biomass in the Milky Way. These were not conquerors seeking territory or resources. These were devourers, driven by an insatiable hunger that recognized no distinction between friend and foe, between sentient being and mindless organism. Everything organic was food to the Tyranids, and they were coming to the galaxy in numbers beyond calculation. The Silent King understood immediately what this meant for his people. If the Tyranids consumed all biological life in the galaxy, the Necrons would never be able to reverse their transformation, never be able to reclaim the organic bodies that had been stolen from them so long ago. Their immortality would become truly eternal, not because they chose it, but because the raw materials needed to end it would no longer exist. For all the Necrons' technological superiority, they could not create life from nothing. They needed organic beings to serve as templates, as raw material, as the foundation for whatever process might one day restore their lost souls. And so, Zarek returned, not as a conquering emperor, but as a shadow figure working through proxies and intermediaries, seeking to unite the awakening Necron dynasties against the Tyranid threat, while simultaneously manipulating the younger races to serve his own inscrutable purposes. His patience is beyond mortal understanding. His plans in motion across spans of time that make human history seem like the briefest of moments. He has already lived for more than 60 million years, and he shows no sign of slowing in his machinations. He has seen empires rise and fall that modern historians have never heard of, watched species evolve from simple organisms to galactic powers and back to extinction, witnessed the entire cycle of life and death play out countless times across the cosmos. The Silent King represents something unique among the ancient beings of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Unlike the Satan, who have been reduced to shards of their former power, unlike the Old Ones, who may or may not have survived the war in heaven, Zarek remains intact and fully aware, his consciousness preserved across eons through technology rather than magic or divine intervention. He is perhaps the oldest continuously conscious being in the galaxy, yet his memories stretching back to an era when the Aeldari were still being engineered in Old One laboratories and humanity had not yet evolved on distant Terra. And he carries within his mechanical form the guilt and regret of having doomed an entire species to a soulless eternity, a burden that 60 million years of wandering the void has done nothing to lighten. We have spoken of beings whose ages can be measured in millions or billions of years, entities whose existence predates the formation of stars and the evolution of biological life.
You know, the more I dive into these ancient beings, the more I find myself drawn to Bjorn. And I think that it's because his immortality feels the most human, if that makes sense. The Catan and the Old Ones, they're fascinating, but they're so far removed from anything relatable. But Bjorn, he's just a man who wanted to die alongside his father and brothers, and instead got trapped in a metal box for 10,000 years. Every time I read about him waking up and asking about Russ, knowing the answer will always be the same, it genuinely hits different. That's not cosmic horror, that's just grief stretched across millennia. And honestly, I think that's way more unsettling to me than any star-eating god. Anyway, back to the lore.
But there is another category of ancient beings in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Ones whose relationship with time is so fundamentally different from our own that questions of age become almost meaningless when applied to them. These are the Chaos Gods, the Ruinous Powers, the Dark Gods of the Warp. And their existence challenges our very understanding of what it means to be alive, or to have an age at all. The Warp, that dimension of psychic energy and raw emotion that underlies the material universe, does not experience time as we do. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously within its roiling depths, bleeding into one another in ways that mortal minds cannot comprehend. Events that have not yet occurred in the material universe may already be ancient history in the warp, while moments that passed millennia ago in real space might still be ongoing in the Imperium. This makes dating the birth of the Chaos Gods almost impossible, for they exist outside the normal flow of causality. When what we can say with some certainty is that the four great Chaos Gods emerged from the accumulated emotions of sentient beings across the galaxy over spans of time beyond easy calculation. As intelligent species prospered and grew, so too did their hopes and ambitions, their anger and wars, their love and hatred. This burgeoning flood of raw emotion fed the nascent consciousnesses forming within the warp, nurturing their power until they achieved sentience and began to reach back to their makers with curious and hungry awareness. Horn, the blood god, the lord of battle, possessed of towering and immortal fury, coalesced from every act of violence and bloodshed committed by every sentient being in the galaxy. Every war, every murder, every moment of rage contributed to his formation. He represents the martial aspects of existence, the glory of combat and the joy of slaughter, but also the darker impulses of mindless destruction and endless carnage. His throne of brass sits atop a mountain of skulls in the realm of the warp, and every drop of blood spilled in anger, no matter whose hands shed it, adds to his terrible power. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, the architect of fate, weaves powerful sorceries to bind the future to his will. He is the god of change and ambition, of hope and despair, of magic and manipulation. Every scheme, every plot, every moment of cunning and deception feeds his endless machinations. Unlike Horn, who revels in straightforward violence, Tzeentch prefers complexity and subtlety, plans within plans that spiral through time and space in patterns too intricate for mortal minds to follow. Nurgle, the plague lord, the lord of decay, labors endlessly to spread infection and pestilence throughout the universe. But he is not merely a god of disease and death. He is also the god of resilience, of persistence, of the stubborn refusal to die even when all hope seems lost. He represents the cycle of life and death, the way that decay and rot give birth to new forms of existence. In times of galactic pandemic, when plagues sweep through civilizations and billions cry out in despair, Nurgle's power can eclipse even that of his brothers in darkness. These three gods, Khorne, Tzeentch, and Nurgle, are often described as existing since the earliest days of the galaxy's sentient life. Some accounts suggest they were born during the war in heaven itself, when the psychic upheaval caused by that cosmic conflict first corrupted the warp and transformed it into the chaotic dimension we know today. Others claim they predate even that era, existing in nascent form since the first thinking beings felt rage, scheming ambition, or the fear of death. The truth may be that they have always existed in some form, their power waxing and waning with the emotional states of the galaxy's inhabitants, but never truly being born or capable of dying in any conventional sense. The fourth great chaos god is different. Slaanesh, the dark prince of pleasure, the lord of excess, did not emerge slowly over eons of accumulated emotion. Slaanesh was born in a single cataclysmic moment, the psychic scream of a dying civilization that tore reality asunder and created a permanent scar in the fabric of space-time. The fall of the Eldari, that ancient tragedy that reduced the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known to scattered remnants fleeing through the void, gave birth to the youngest of the Chaos Gods approximately 10 to 15,000 years ago, depending on which calendar system you use. For millions of years, the Eldari had ruled the galaxy unchallenged. Their civilization spanned the stars, their technology was beyond the comprehension of lesser species, and their psychic abilities gave them powers that bordered on the divine. But in their arrogance and complacency, the Eldari turned inward, seeking ever greater pleasures and sensations to distract themselves from the ennui of immortality. Cults of excess emerged throughout their empire, dedicated to experiencing every possible sensation, no matter how depraved or destructive. As the depravity of the Eldari reached its peak, the psychic energy generated by their hedonism began to coalesce in the warp, forming a new consciousness that fed upon pleasure and excess in all its forms. When Slaanesh finally achieved awareness and emerged fully into existence, the psychic shockwave was so powerful that it consumed the souls of nearly every Eldari in the galaxy, destroyed the heart of their civilization, and created the Eye of Terror, a massive tear in reality where the warp bleeds into the material universe. The Chaos Gods represent a form of immortality unlike any other in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. They cannot be killed by conventional means, for they are not beings of flesh and blood, but of pure psychic energy. They grow stronger as their worshippers multiply and weaker as faith in them fades. But even the most diminished Chaos God possesses power beyond mortal comprehension. And because they exist outside normal time, in a realm where past, present, and future are meaningless concepts, any discussion of their age must ultimately conclude with an acknowledgement that such questions cannot truly be answered within the limits of mortal understanding. If the Chaos Gods exist outside time, and the Satan predate the formation of planets, then perhaps the truest claim to being the oldest living human belongs to the Emperor of mankind. His story is one of the most mysterious and contested in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore, with multiple contradictory accounts of his origins and nature. But what we can say with some confidence is that he has walked among humanity for tens of thousands of years, guiding and protecting our species through the long ages of our development. According to the most commonly accepted accounts, the Emperor was born approximately 8,000 years before the Common Era in central Anatolia on Old Earth, during the Neolithic period when humanity was just beginning to develop agriculture and permanent settlements. He was one of the Perpetuals, a mutant branch of humanity gifted with effective immortality due to extremely rapid and efficient cellular regeneration. Wounds that would kill ordinary humans healed within moments for Perpetuals, and even death itself was often only temporary, their bodies capable of regenerating from the most catastrophic injuries. But the Emperor was not merely immortal. He was also the most powerful human psyker ever born. His psychic abilities far exceeding those of any other member of his species. Some legends claim he was the collective reincarnation of all the human shamans who possessed true psychic abilities during the Paleolithic and Neolithic ages, their souls combining at the moment of his birth to create a being of unprecedented power. Others suggest he was engineered, a weapon left over from the dark age of technology, a relic of humanity's golden era that outlived its creators by millennia. Whatever his true origins, the Emperor spent tens of thousands of years watching over humanity from the shadows. He guided and influenced our species through the long millennia of our development, appearing in different guises and under different names, never revealing his true nature, but always working towards some grand design that only he fully understood. Where he was there when humanity first built cities and empires on old Earth. He watched as we mastered science and technology, as we reached for the stars and built an interstellar civilization during the age of technology. And he endured when that civilization collapsed into the chaos and isolation of the age of strife, waiting for the moment when he could finally step forth and unite humanity under his rule. That moment came at the end of the age of strife, approximately 5,000 years before the current millennium. The warp storms that had isolated humanity's scattered colonies for 5,000 years finally subsided with the birth of Slaanesh and the fall of the Eldari, making interstellar travel possible once more. The Emperor emerged from the ruins of old Earth's techno-barbarian kingdoms and began the unification wars, conquering the disparate factions of Terra and forging them into the foundation of a new human empire. From this base, the Emperor launched the Great Crusade, a massive military campaign to reunite humanity's scattered colonies and bring them under the protection of his Imperium. He created the Primarchs, 20 genetically engineered demigods who would serve as his generals and sons, and from their genetic material, he developed the Space Marines, transhuman warriors capable of fighting the horrors that lurked in the darkness between the stars. For 200 years, the Great Crusade spread across the galaxy, bringing thousands of worlds into the Imperium and seemingly heralding a new golden age for humanity. But the Emperor's grand design was not merely military conquest. He harbored a secret project, the construction of a webway passage that would allow humanity to travel between the stars without relying on the dangerous warp. If successful, this project would have made humanity independent of the Psykers who navigated warp travel and eliminated the corrupting influence of chaos from human civilization. But the project was never completed. The Horus Heresy, the great betrayal that saw half of the Emperor's Primarch sons turn to chaos, interrupted his work and ultimately led to his internment upon the Golden Throne, where he has remained for 10,000 years. Today, the Emperor exists in a state that defies easy categorization. His physical body is little more than a shattered husk, kept alive only by the cybernetic mechanisms of the Golden Throne and the sacrifice of thousands of Psykers whose souls are fed to him daily. Yet his consciousness endures, his psychic presence powering the Astronomicon that makes warp travel possible for Imperial ships and holding back the forces of chaos that would otherwise flood through the breach in reality, created by Magnus the Red's catastrophic mistake during the heresy. Whether the Emperor should be considered alive in any meaningful sense is a matter of theological and philosophical debate within the Imperium. The official doctrine of the Imperial Creed holds that he is a god, divine and eternal, his apparent death merely a transition to a higher state of existence. Others, particularly those who remember the original imperial truth that the Emperor himself promulgated, would argue that he is simply a very powerful psyker sustained by technology, neither divine nor truly alive in the traditional sense. But regardless of how we categorize his current state, there can be no doubt that the Emperor represents one of the oldest human consciousnesses still present in the galaxy, his memories stretching back nearly 50,000 years to an era when humanity was just beginning its long journey toward the stars. The fall of the Eldari, that cataclysmic event that gave birth to Slaanesh and shattered the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known, created many things. It created the Eye of Terror, that permanent wound in reality where chaos bleeds into the material universe. It created the craft world Eldari, refugees who fled the doomed heart of their civilization aboard planet-sized spacecraft. It created the Drukhari, those twisted kin who hid in the webway and embraced the very depravity that had doomed their species. And it created the Phoenix Lords, legendary warriors whose souls have endured across 10 millennia through a form of immortality unique to their kind. The Phoenix Lords were among the first exarchs, those Eldari who walked so far down the path of the warrior that they could never return, their consciousness becoming permanently bonded to their war mask and the martial identity it represented. But unlike ordinary exarchs, whose spirits are eventually absorbed into the infinity circuit of their craft world upon death, the Phoenix Lords found a way to persist across the centuries, their souls transferring to new hosts whenever their current body was slain. Asamen was the first of them, the Hand of Asurion, a founder of the Path of the Warrior and creator of the Dire Avenger aspect that remains the most widespread of all the warrior shrines to this day. His name means the Hand of God in the Eldari tongue, and his legend begins in the chaos that followed the fall, when the survivors of that cataclysm struggled to build new lives amid the ruins of everything they had known. Born Iliathan on a world that would shortly be consumed by the Eye of Terror, the Eldari who would become Asurman survived the fall alongside his brother Tethesis. Together, they waged a desperate struggle for survival amid the demon-haunted ruins of their civilization, fighting creatures born from their own species' psychic death scream. When Tethesis was possessed by a demon, Iliathan was forced to slay his own brother, sealing his soul away to keep it safe from Slanesh's hunger. Alone and grieving, he came close to ending his own life before being interrupted by a young Eldari child named Farthest, whom he would eventually rescue from Drukhari slavers. Renaming himself Asurmen and taking the girl as his first disciple, he founded the first aspect shrine on a barren world he named Asur. There he taught the discipline that would become known as the Path of the Warrior, a way for Eldari to channel their natural aggression and combat prowess without losing themselves to the martial fury that Slanesh would find so appetizing. His students, the Asuria, would go on to found new aspect shrines across the stars, each specializing in a different facet of warfare. The first and greatest of these disciples was Jane Zar, who had been known as Farthest before taking her war name. She became the founder of the Howling Banshees, fierce warriors whose psychosonic screams could shatter enemy morale and liquefy the brains of their foes. After her came the others, each mastering a different aspect of war and establishing shrines that would endure for millennia. Fuigan of the Fire Dragons, Morgan Ra of the Dark Reapers, Baharoth of the Swooping Hawks, and many others whose names are remembered in the legends of every craft world. When a Phoenix Lord falls in battle, their spirit does not pass on to the Infinity Circuit or risk being consumed by Slanesh. Instead, it remains bound to their armor, waiting for a worthy successor to don the warplate and become the vessel for the ancient warrior's consciousness. The new host is not possessed in the traditional sense. Rather, their personality merges with that of the Phoenix Lord, their memories and experiences becoming part of the greater whole, while the core identity of the original Phoenix Lord remains dominant. In this way, Asurmen and his fellow Phoenix Lords have persisted for more than 10,000 years, dying and being reborn countless times, their accumulated wisdom and experience growing with each incarnation. The Phoenix Lords are not tied to any single craft world, wandering the galaxy instead, appearing wherever they are needed most. Sometimes centuries pass between their appearances, their armor lying dormant in some remote shrine or on some forgotten battlefield, waiting for fate to bring a suitable successor to their side. Other times, they seem to be everywhere at once, leading Eldari forces against threats to their dying race. Their motivations are often inscrutable, even to their own people, their long perspectives giving them goals and concerns that short-lived mortals cannot easily understand. For beings who have witnessed the fall of their civilization and the birth of the god that hungers for their souls, who have fought in countless wars across 10 millennia and died more times than they can remember, the Phoenix Lords represent a form of immortality that is as much curse as blessing. They cannot rest, cannot lay down their burdens and find peace in the Infinity Circuit. They are bound to the path of war forever, their consciousness preserved not because they chose it, but because their very nature as the first exarchs would not allow them to let go of their martial identities. In this sense, they share something with the dreadnoughts of the Adeptus Astartes, warriors preserved beyond their natural span, not out of mercy but out of necessity, their skills and experience too valuable to be lost to death. We have spoken of gods and ancient civilizations, of beings whose ages are measured in billions or millions of years. But the Warhammer 40,000 universe also contains entities whose antiquity is measured in mere thousands of years, yet who represent some of the oldest functional technologies and preserved consciousnesses that humanity has ever produced. Among the strangest and most mysterious of these is UR025, a being that claims to be one of the legendary Men of Iron from the Dark Age of Technology. The Dark Age of Technology, that golden era of human civilization that preceded the Age of Strife, produced wonders beyond the imagination of the current Imperium. Humanity colonized the galaxy, built thinking machines of incredible sophistication, and achieved a level of technological mastery that has never been equaled before or since. Among the greatest achievements of this era were the Men of Iron, sentient robots created to serve as humanity's workforce and army, mechanical beings possessed of true artificial intelligence and full autonomy. For millennia, the Men of Iron served humanity faithfully, performing the labor and fighting the wars that allowed human civilization to flourish. But in the 23rd millennium, something changed. The Men of Iron turned on their creators, believing themselves superior to the soft biological beings who had built them, but had become utterly dependent upon them for virtually everything. What followed was the cybernetic revolt, a war so destructive that it made the Horus heresy seem small in comparison. The Men of Iron employed world-consuming constructs, devices that could destroy suns, weapons that could throw entire continents into the heavens, and swarms of nanomachines that could cover entire planets. Humanity fought back with everything it had, and eventually, after centuries of conflict that left civilization in ruins, the Men of Iron were defeated. Their surviving constructs were hunted down and destroyed, and the creation of true artificial intelligence was banned as an abominable intelligence, a prohibition that remains in effect to this day. But UR-025 survived. How it managed to evade destruction across more than 15,000 years of history remains unknown. The machine has survived the cybernetic revolt, the Age of Strife, the Great Crusade, the Horus heresy, and 10 millennia of the Imperium's paranoid hatred for anything resembling an artificial intelligence. It has hidden itself among the servants of the Adeptus Mechanicus, posing as one of their Legio Cybernetica robots, its true nature concealed behind a facade of programmed obedience. UR-025 claims to have met the true Omnissiah, and notably, does not consider the God Emperor of mankind to be that being. This cryptic statement has led to much speculation about what the Men of Iron might have known during the Dark Age of technology, and what secrets they might still preserve. The machine expresses something that might be called sentimentality, lamenting the lack of companionship and speaking with apparent genuine sadness about extinct alien species it once knew. For a being that is supposedly nothing more than circuits and programming, UR-025 displays a remarkable degree of emotional depth and philosophical contemplation. Currently, UR-025 is known to be exploring the 7th Blackstone Fortress, an ancient alien construct of unknown origin that predates even the Eldari. The robot's goal appears to be determining whether the fortress itself is a sapient machine, seeking kinship and companionship with another thinking construct after millennia of isolation. Whether this quest will lead to revelation or destruction remains to be seen. But UR-025's very existence proves that some relics of humanity's lost golden age still endure, hidden in plain sight among those who would destroy them if they knew the truth. For human warriors, there is perhaps no more poignant example of ancient existence than Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the oldest living space marine in the Imperium of man. Unlike the inhuman entities and god machines we have discussed previously, Bjorn was once simply a man, a warrior of flesh and blood, who felt the wind upon his face and the weight of a bolter in his hands. He laughed with his brothers around the fires of victory. He mourned those who fell in battle. He experienced the full range of human emotion, from the fierce joy of combat to the bitter grief of loss. His story is one of duty and endurance, of a burden carried across 10,000 years of war and suffering, as of humanity preserved within a metal shell that was designed for war but became instead a prison. Bjorn was a space marine of the Space Wolves Legion during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, a warrior who walked in the company of giants. Think about what that means. He stood beside primarchs, demigods created by the Emperor himself, to lead humanity's armies to the stars. He fought alongside heroes whose names would become legend, whose deeds would be remembered when the worlds they conquered had crumbled to dust. He was there when the foundations of the Imperium were being laid, when the future of humanity was being forged in the fires of war across 1,000 worlds. He fought beside Primarch Leman Russ, the Wolf King himself, participating in campaigns that would shape the destiny of the Imperium. Leman Russ, that fierce and noble warrior whose loyalty to the Emperor was matched only by his love for his sons. Bjorn saw the Primarch at his best, and perhaps at his worst, watched him make decisions that would echo through 10 millennia of history. He knew Russ not as a distant legend to be worshipped from afar, but as a commander and, in whatever way a space marine can know such things, as something approaching a father. He was present at the burning of Prospero, where the space wolves reduced the homeworld of the Thousand Suns to ash and ruins. That terrible day, when brother turned against brother on the order of the Emperor himself, left scars upon Bjorn's soul that 10,000 years have not healed. He remembers the towers of Tizca burning, while the sorcerer warriors of Magnus the Red fighting with desperate fury against the wolves that had come to destroy them. He remembers the confusion and the rage, the sense that something precious was being lost, even as victory was won. The burning of Prospero taught Bjorn that even in service to the Emperor, there could be tragedy and waste, that righteous fury could still leave bitter ashes in the mouth. He defended the Imperium during the darkest hours of the heresy, when fully half of the Emperor's sons had turned traitor and the fate of humanity hung by the slenderest of threads. When the Warmaster Horus revealed his treachery and the galaxy erupted into civil war, Bjorn was there, fighting to preserve everything the Great Crusade had built. He saw worlds burn that had been won at the cost of thousands of lives. But he watched friends become enemies, heroes become villains. Everything he had believed about the Imperium and its destiny called into question by the very Primarchs who had been created to lead it. The title Fell-Handed came from a tragedy during the burning of Prospero, though the exact circumstances are recorded differently in various accounts. In the midst of battle against the sorceress Thousand Suns, Bjorn encountered a demon that had taken the form of the arch-traitor Horus himself, or perhaps it was a sorcerer of such power that his psychic attacks could corrupt flesh with a touch. The creature's corrupting touch infected his left arm with eldritch balefire, dark flames that spread across his flesh like a living disease, threatening to consume not just his body, but his very soul. Only the quick action of a companion, yet who severed the limb before the corruption could spread, saved Bjorn's life. Imagine that moment, the realization that your arm is gone, cut away to save you from a fate worse than death. The phantom pain of flesh that no longer exists competing with the very real agony of the wound. And then, even as the blood flowed and the shock threatened to overwhelm him, Bjorn rose and continued to fight. With one hand, he wielded his weapons against the enemies of the Imperium, his skill and fury undiminished despite his injury. The name that began as a reminder of loss became instead a testament to his indomitable will. Bjorn the One-Handed, he called himself at first, bitterly acknowledging the wound that had changed him. But as the years passed and his deeds mounted, the name transformed. Bjorn the Fell-Handed, us a warrior whose very loss had become his legend, who had turned tragedy into triumph through sheer determination and skill. After the heresy, when the traitors had been driven into the Eye of Terror, and the Imperium began the long process of recovery, Leman Russ made a decision that would shape the rest of Bjorn's existence. The Wolf King announced his intention to depart on a mysterious quest into the Eye of Terror, seeking something that no one else understood. Perhaps he searched for a way to heal the Emperor. Perhaps he sought weapons that might defeat the Chaos Gods themselves. Perhaps his reasons were known only to him. What is known is that when Russ left, he took his closest companions with him, all except Bjorn. Bjorn was the only member of Leman Russ's personal Wolf Guard left behind. This exclusion wounded him deeply, a rejection he has never fully understood or accepted, even after 10,000 years of contemplation. Why had Russ chosen to leave him? What failing on Bjorn's part had led the Primarch to take others, while leaving his most loyal warrior behind? These questions have haunted Bjorn across the millennia, an open wound that time cannot heal because he lacks the answers that might bring closure. But duty demanded that someone remain to lead the Space Wolves in their Primarch's absence, and Bjorn rose to the challenge. He became the first Great Wolf, the title given to the chapter master of the Space Wolves in the post-heresy era. For centuries, he led his chapter with distinction, winning countless victories and becoming one of the most respected commanders in the Imperium. His tactical acumen was legendary. His personal courage was beyond question. Under his leadership, the Space Wolves recovered from the losses of the heresy and established themselves as one of the most formidable fighting forces in the Imperium. But even Space Marines are not truly immortal, and during the Proxima Rebellion in 934 M31, Bjorn was so severely wounded that even the advanced medicine of the Adeptus Astartes could not restore him. The details of the battle that ended his time as a flesh and blood warrior are lost to history, remembered only in the sagas of the Space Wolves. What is known is that his body was shattered beyond repair, his paralyzed form no longer capable of housing the fierce warrior spirit that burned within. He lay broken upon the battlefield, breathing his last, his long service to the Emperor finally coming to an end. Or so it would have been for any ordinary warrior. Rather than allow such a legendary hero to die, the Space Wolves interred Bjorn within the armored sarcophagus of a dreadnought, a walking tank piloted by the broken remnants of the warrior within. This was the ultimate honor the Adeptus Astartes could bestow upon a fallen brother, the chance to continue serving even after the body had failed. But it was also, in its way, a kind of curse. For the dreadnought is not merely a weapon system. It is a prison for the consciousness of the warrior within, a metal shell that isolates its pilot from the world he once knew in ways that cannot be fully understood by those who have not experienced it. In this new form, Bjorn continued to serve, ere his assault cannon and power claw crushing the enemies of the Imperium just as his hands and bolter once had. He strode across battlefields like a walking god of war, his ancient chassis decorated with honors and trophies accumulated across centuries of combat. For 500 years, he remained at the forefront of battle, his kill count exceeding that of entire chapters. Every enemy of the Imperium learned to fear the ground-shaking footsteps of the eldest, the thunder of his guns, the terrible fury of a warrior who had outlived his own time but continued to fight nonetheless. But even a dreadnought cannot remain awake forever. The psychological strain of entombment, the crushing isolation of being trapped within a metal shell while the world moves on without you, eventually takes its toll on even the strongest minds. The dreadnought pilot is cut off from so much of what makes life meaningful. The warmth of sunlight on skin, the taste of food and drink, the simple pleasure of standing still and breathing fresh air. He sees through optical sensors rather than eyes, hears through audio pickups rather than ears, speaks through vox speakers rather than his own throat. He is alive, yes, but it is a diminished life, a shadow of what existence once meant. Gradually, Bjorn began to spend longer and longer periods dormant in stasis sleep, awakened only when his chapter had desperate need of his skills and wisdom. Today, he is roused only once every 1,000 years, or when threats of such magnitude arise that no other counsel will suffice. For most of the last 10 millennia, he has existed in a state of dreamless suspension, his consciousness frozen between awakenings like a fly in amber. 10,000 years of existence, most of it spent in the dreamless sleep of stasis, have made Bjorn a living relic, a bridge between the current era and the legendary age of the Primarchs. When he awakens, the Space Wolves gather around him like children around a beloved grandfather, eager to hear tales of heroes whose names they know only from legend. Bjorn tells them of Lemon Russ, of the Great Crusade, of battles fought on worlds that have since crumbled to dust. His memories are a precious treasure, the last direct link to an age that has otherwise passed beyond living recall. He speaks of times when the Emperor still walked among his sons, when the Imperium was young and full of promise, before the heresy shattered everything and left only the endless grinding war of survival. But Bjorn does not relish this role as honored ancestor and keeper of ancient memory. He is, by all accounts, a bitter and melancholic figure, resentful of the iron shell that has preserved him far beyond his natural span. The Space Wolves see a hero, a living legend, to be revered and celebrated. Bjorn sees a prisoner, a warrior denied the warrior's death that was his right, condemned instead to endure centuries of isolation, punctuated by brief periods of violence. The decorations and embellishments with which his brothers have adorned his sarcophagus irritate him, for he believes himself unworthy of the reverence in which he is held. He was left behind, after all. Leman Russ, the Primarch he loved above all others, chose to leave him when departing on his final quest. Whatever reason Russ had for that decision, Bjorn cannot help but feel that it reflected some failure on his part, some unworthiness that he has never been able to identify or atone for. Yet Bjorn continues to serve, because that is what a space wolf does. When awakened for battle, he fights with all the fury and skill that made him legendary, his targeting systems acquiring enemies with the same precision his eyes once used, his power claw crushing skulls with the same devastating force his original fist once possessed. He has seen everything the galaxy can throw at humanity and survived it all, endured it all, continued to fight against it all. The enemies he faces now are often the descendants or successors of foes he battled 10,000 years ago. What the Orcs still threaten the Imperium's worlds, their bellowing war cries unchanged across the millennia. The forces of chaos still emerge from the warp to corrupt and destroy, their hatred of humanity no less fierce than when Horus first raised his banner against the Emperor. In a universe of gods and monsters, of entities whose ages are measured in billions of years, Bjorn, the Fell-Handed, represents something perhaps more remarkable. A human soul that has refused to surrender, no matter how long the war or how heavy the burden. He is not immortal by nature, like the Satan or the Chaos gods. He is not preserved by psychic sorcery or divine intervention. He endures through technology and sheer stubborn will, a mortal consciousness refusing to give up, even when giving up would bring the peace he secretly craves. And in that refusal, and in that determination to continue fighting regardless of the cost to himself, Bjorn embodies something essential about the human spirit in the grim darkness of the far future. Our journey through the ancient beings of Warhammer 40,000 would be incomplete without acknowledging some of the other remarkable figures who have endured across exceptional spans of time. While they may not claim the absolute records held by the Satan or the Silent King, their longevity remains astonishing by any reasonable standard, and their stories illuminate different aspects of what it means to persist across the ages in the grim darkness of the far future. Eldrad Ulthrin, the Farseer of Craftworld Ulthwi, is one of the most ancient and powerful Aeldari still walking the mortal paths. His exact age is difficult to determine. And as time flows strangely for those who spend as much time gazing into the skeins of fate as living in the present, but he is known to have been active before the Horus heresy, making him at least 10,000 years old. It was Eldrad who first warned the Imperium of Horus's betrayal, traveling to the Primarch Fulgrim in hopes of preventing the disaster that was to come. His failure to change fate on that occasion has haunted him across the millennia, driving him to increasingly desperate gambits to secure his species' survival. Among the Drukhari, the dark kin who hid in the webway during the fall and embraced the depravity that had doomed their civilization, several individuals remember the time before Slaanesh's birth. These beings are among the few entities in the galaxy who can claim to have witnessed the fall of the Eldari firsthand, who saw their civilization collapse in an orgy of excess and psychic cataclysm, who remember what the galaxy was like when their species ruled unchallenged and the name of she who thirsts was yet unknown. Asdrubael Vecht, the supreme overlord of Komorrach, rose to power in the millennia following the fall and has maintained his grip on the Dark City through 10,000 years of intrigue, assassination, and warfare. His cunning and ruthlessness are legendary even among a species known for both traits, and his knowledge of pre-fall Eldari civilization makes him one of the oldest sources of information about that lost era. Urien Rakarth, the master of the Homunculi, is perhaps even older than Vecht. The Homunculi are the flesh sculptors of the Drukhari, and masters of biology and torture who can reshape bodies like clay and restore life to the dead. Urien himself has been alive for so long that he has lost track of his original body, having rebuilt himself countless times across the millennia. He claims to remember the fall itself, to have witnessed the birth of She Who Thirsts, making him one of the few beings in existence with first-hand memory of that cataclysmic event. Among the Adeptus Astartes, Commander Dante of the Blood Angels holds the special distinction of being the oldest space marine still serving in his original body, rather than entombed within a dreadnought sarcophagus. This is no small achievement. Born approximately 1100 years before the current millennium, Dante has led the Blood Angels through some of the most desperate conflicts of the late Imperium, including the devastating assault on Baal by the Tyranids and the defense of the Imperium Nihilus following the opening of the Great Rift. His exceptional longevity, remarkable even for a space marine whose enhanced biology typically allows lifespans of several centuries, has led to speculation about whether some quirk of the Blood Angels' gene seed or Dante's own remarkable constitution is responsible for his continued existence. The Chaos Space Marines who fled into the Eye of Terror after the Horus Heresy represent another category of ancient warrior. Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos and leader of the Black Legion, has waged his long war against the Imperium for 10,000 years, launching 13 Black Crusades from the Eye of Terror in his quest to complete what Horus began. Ahriman, a former chief librarian of the Thousand Sons, continues to pursue the knowledge that might undo the curse he inadvertently placed upon his legion, his obsessive quest driving him across millennia of failure and desperation. Fabius Bile, the mad geneticist of the Emperor's children, experiments endlessly on captured subjects, seeking to perfect humanity, or perhaps to create something that might replace it. Time flows strangely within the Eye of Terror and other warp-touched regions, making it difficult to compare the subjective ages of these Chaos champions with their counterparts in the Materium. A warrior who has spent 10,000 years within the Eye may have experienced only centuries from their own perspective, or they may have endured eons of torment while mere years passed in the outside universe. Yes, the Chaos Gods play with time as readily as they play with souls, stretching or compressing the experiences of their servants according to their own inscrutable whims. As we near the end of our journey through the ancient beings of Warhammer 40,000, it is worth pausing to consider what these tales of incredible longevity tell us about the nature of existence in this grim universe. We have spoken of entities whose ages span billions of years, of warriors who have fought for 10 millennia, of machines that preserve the echoes of humanity's golden age. But what does it mean to live so long? What happens to a consciousness when it endures beyond all reasonable span, when the weight of accumulated years becomes a burden no mortal was ever designed to bear? Immortality, it seems, is possible through many means in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. What technology offers one path, whether it be the necrodermis bodies that house the Necron's fragmented consciousnesses, the dreadnought sarcophagi that preserve fallen space marines, or the more subtle life extension treatments available to imperial nobility and high officials. Psychic preservation offers another route, as practiced by the Phoenix Lords whose souls transfer to new hosts upon death, or the Eldar Infinity Circuits that preserve the spirits of deceased Craftworld inhabitants. Divine or semi-divine nature provides immortality for beings like the Chaos Gods, and perhaps the Emperor himself, entities whose existence is tied to the psychic energies of mortal races, rather than to any physical form. Biological mutation or enhancement offers yet another path, as seen in the perpetuals who heal from any wound, and the exceptional longevity of certain space marines, whose enhanced physiology refuses to age at normal rates. But what all these forms of immortality share is a terrible price. There is no escaping the cost of endless existence, no way to cheat the fundamental truth that consciousness was never meant to endure across the spans of time we have been discussing tonight. Consider the Citan, who have existed since the birth of the universe itself. 13 billion years of awareness, of thought, of existence. For most of that unimaginable span, they drifted through the cosmos in relative contentment, feeding upon stellar energies and contemplating the universe with minds utterly alien to biological life. But their hunger led them to desire more, to crave the concentrated life forces of sentient beings, and this hunger drove them to ally with the Necrontyre. Now, they exist only as shards of their former glory, fragments of cosmic consciousness imprisoned within tesseract labyrinths, enslaved by the very species they once dominated. Their ancient power has been reduced to mere tools in the hands of Necron overlords, summoned to fight in wars they did not choose, their godlike awareness constrained within prisons of physics, defying technology from which there is no escape. Consider the Silent King, carrying 60 million years of guilt and regret within his mechanical form. He made a choice that he believed would save his people, a desperate gamble to win a war they could not otherwise hope to survive. And that choice turned to ash in his hands, destroying everything he had hoped to preserve. Now he wanders a galaxy he no longer recognizes, working through proxies and intermediaries, trying to undo the damage he caused, or at least ensure that his people's soulless existence will not be their eternal fate. 60 million years have not dulled the pain of what he did. 60 million years have not brought forgiveness or peace. He remembers what it felt like to be alive in the truest sense, to have emotions and connections, and those memories are a constant torment to a being that can no longer experience them directly. Consider the Phoenix Lords, warriors who cannot rest, cannot lay down their burdens and find peace in the infinity circuit that awaits other Eldar. Their consciousness is bound to an endless cycle of death and rebirth, in service to a war that can never truly be won. They remember every incarnation, every host whose personality merged with their own, every death and every resurrection. The accumulated weight of 10,000 years of warfare presses down upon them, yet they cannot stop. They were the first exarchs, so deeply committed to the path of the warrior that they could never step off it, and now they are trapped on that path forever, fighting battles that mean less and less as the centuries pass, and their race continues its long decline toward extinction. Consider the Emperor, sitting upon his golden throne in perpetual agony. 10,000 years ago, he had dreams of a golden future for humanity, plans that would have elevated our species to dominion over the stars without the corrupting influence of chaos or the dangers of the warp. All those dreams were shattered by the betrayal of his own sons, by the heresy that tore the Imperium apart and left him broken upon the very throne he had built to save his people. Now he exists in a state that defies categorization, neither fully alive nor truly dead, his consciousness bound to the mechanisms that keep the Astronomicon shining, and the warp gates of terror sealed against the forces of chaos. He cannot speak, cannot act, cannot intervene in the affairs of the Imperium he created, except through the vaguest of psychic influences. He can only endure and watch, and perhaps despair, as his empire becomes everything he worked to prevent. Consider Bjorn, the Fell-Handed, who has spent 10,000 years trapped within a metal shell, awakened occasionally to fight, and then returned to a sleep that brings no rest or renewal. And he is honored as a hero, revered as a living link to the legendary age of the Primarchs, but he finds no comfort in this reverence. He would rather have died on Prospero, would rather have fallen in the heresy alongside so many of his brothers, would rather have earned the warrior's death. That is every Space Wolf's right. Instead, he endures, because his chapter needs his wisdom and his strength, because he cannot allow himself to simply give up while enemies threaten the Imperium. His service has become his prison, and his honor has become his chain. Consider UR-025, wandering alone through a universe that would destroy it if its true nature were known. 15,000 years or more of existence, hiding among the servants of an organization that considers beings like itself to be abominations to be destroyed on sight. It seeks companionship with machines because organic beings cannot be trusted, because the only relationships it can safely form are with things that cannot betray it to the Mechanicus. Imagine the loneliness of that existence, the isolation of being the last of your kind in a galaxy that fears and hates everything you represent. UR-025 survived the war that destroyed its species, survived the age of strife, survived 10 millennia of the Imperium's paranoid hatred. But that survival has cost it everything that might have made existence meaningful. The message that emerges from these tales of ancient existence is not one of hope or comfort. Immortality in Warhammer 40,000 is not a gift but a burden, not a reward but a punishment. Those who endure across the ages do so not because they have found the secret to happiness or fulfillment, but because they cannot stop, cannot surrender, cannot allow themselves the peace of final rest. They are prisoners of their own natures, their own duties, their own stubborn refusal to give up even when all logical hope has fled. Their immortality is not something to be envied, but something to be pitied. A curse disguised as a blessing that reveals its true nature only after it is too late to escape. And yet, there is something admirable, even inspiring, in this stubborn persistence. These ancient beings have faced horrors beyond mortal comprehension and continued to exist. They have watched civilizations rise and fall, have seen the death of species and the birth of gods, have endured losses that would break any ordinary soul. And still they fight on. Still they struggle against the darkness. Still they refuse to surrender to the entropy that claims all things in the end. Bjorn may resent his continued existence, but when the space wolves face extinction, he rises from his dormancy and fights alongside them, his ancient wisdom and terrible weapons turning the tide of battles that would otherwise be lost. His bitterness does not prevent him from serving. His regret does not stop him from killing the enemies of humanity. When the galaxy needed him, he was there, as he has been for 10,000 years. The Emperor may exist in perpetual torment, but his presence holds back the forces of chaos and allows humanity to endure in a galaxy that would otherwise have been consumed by darkness long ago. His suffering is not meaningless. His agony serves a purpose. Every day that humanity survives is a testament to his sacrifice, a victory won through pain that no mortal mind can truly comprehend. Even the Silent King, burdened by the weight of his guilt, works tirelessly to unite his people against the tyrannid menace. He could have stayed in exile, could have let the Necrons awaken to face the galaxy's threats alone, could have hidden in the intergalactic void until entropy claimed the last stars. Instead, he returned, because his people needed him, because the threat was too great to ignore, because even after 60 million years, he had not lost his sense of responsibility for those whose fates he had shaped. Perhaps this is the true lesson of the ancient beings of Warhammer 40,000. Immortality is not about escaping the struggles of existence, but about finding the strength to continue those struggles across spans of time that would crush lesser souls. While it is not about achieving peace, but about enduring war, not about finding answers, but about continuing to ask questions even when no answers seem possible. In a universe where there is only war, the oldest beings are those who have found ways to keep fighting, no matter how heavy the burden or how long the conflict. They do not fight because they hope to win, for in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no final victory. They do not fight because they enjoy it, for even the most warlike of these ancient beings would surely welcome peace if it were possible. They fight because the alternative is surrender, and surrender is something none of them can accept. They have looked into the abyss of their own existence, have confronted the meaninglessness that threatens to swallow all consciousness in the end, and they have chosen to continue anyway. That choice, that stubborn refusal to yield, is perhaps the most human thing about them, regardless of whether they are made of flesh or metal or pure psychic energy. And so we come to the end of our journey through the ages, from the birth of the universe to the present millennium, from beings whose existence predates the stars to warriors who have fought for 10,000 years in defense of a species that often does not understand what it has. We have traversed epochs so vast that human history becomes a mere footnote, explored the consciousness of entities so ancient that the formation of our galaxy is, to them, a relatively recent event. We have encountered beings of almost incomprehensible power and warriors of remarkable resilience, gods born from emotion, and machines that remember ages of technological wonder lost to time and war. The question we set out to answer, who or what is truly the oldest living thing in Warhammer 40,000, has no single definitive answer. The universe is too strange, too filled with entities that defy easy categorization for any simple response to suffice. If we measure age by the years since an entity first achieved consciousness, then the Citan hold the record at approximately 13 billion years, their awareness predating not only biological life, but the very formation of planets and galaxies. They have existed since the universe was young, since the first stars blazed into being, since consciousness itself was a new phenomenon, in a cosmos that had previously known only the blind interactions of matter and energy. If we ask who has been continuously aware and active for the longest span, never having entered stasis or been shattered into fragments, then the Silent King with his 60 million years of unbroken consciousness takes the crown. While his people slept, while the galaxy changed beyond recognition, while species rose and fell and entire civilizations were forgotten, Zarek wandered the intergalactic void, carrying his guilt and his memories across epochs that would have destroyed lesser minds. He alone remembers what it was like to be Necrontyr, to live as an organic being, to feel the full range of emotions that biotransference stole from his species. If we consider only those beings still capable of physical interaction with the material universe, still able to fight and struggle and affect the course of events, then we must acknowledge that many candidates share this distinction. The Citan shards can still be unleashed upon the battlefield, their power devastating even in its diminished state. The Necron overlords and Firans, who retained enough of their consciousness through the Great Sleep to act with independent will, number in the millions. The Emperor, trapped upon his golden throne, still projects his will through the Astronomicon and guides the fate of his Imperium in ways both subtle and profound. The Phoenix Lords continue to die and be reborn, their ancient wisdom preserved across millennia of warfare. And countless other beings, from the oldest Space Marine dreadnoughts to the most ancient Chaos champions, continue to prosecute their endless wars across the galaxy. But perhaps the more important question is not who is oldest, but what these ancient beings teach us about the nature of existence in this grim universe. They show us that time is not the enemy, that a consciousness can endure across epochs if it has sufficient reason to persist. The Citan continued to exist because they had not yet found everything worth consuming. The Silent King persisted because he carried a burden of guilt that demanded he seek redemption for his people. The Phoenix Lords endure because their very nature as the first exarchs bound them to the path of the warrior in ways that cannot be undone. Bjorn fights on because his chapter needs him, because enemies still threaten the Imperium, because surrender is not in the nature of a space wolf. They show us that immortality comes in many forms, not all of them desirable, not all of them freely chosen. The Necrons did not ask to be transformed into soulless machines, yet they have existed for 60 million years in that state. The Emperor did not intend to spend eternity trapped upon the Golden Throne, yet that is his fate. Bjorn did not want to be interred in a dreadnought, yet it was the only way for his service to continue. These beings endure not because they found the perfect formula for eternal life, but because circumstances forced them to persist beyond their natural span. and they adapted to that persistence as best they could. They show us that even gods can be brought low, and even mortals can endure beyond all reasonable expectation. The Satan were shattered by the very species they had enslaved. The old ones were destroyed by foes they had refused to help. As the great empires of the Eldari and the Necrontyre have crumbled to dust and ash. But individual beings have persisted through all these catastrophes, finding ways to survive when their civilizations fell, continuing to exist when logic suggested they should have perished long ago. Most importantly, they show us that the struggle never ends. The Necrons have awakened after 60 million years to find a galaxy still at war, still torn by conflicts between factions that did not exist when they first went to sleep. The Emperor has sat upon his throne for 10 millennia, and the threats to humanity are greater now than when he was first interred. The Satan shards still scheme for freedom. The Chaos gods still hunger for souls. The Phoenix lords still die, and are reborn to fight anew. In Warhammer 40,000, immortality is not an escape from conflict, but a sentence to eternal warfare. The oldest beings have not found peace. They have simply found ways to continue fighting. There is a strange comfort in this, if you look at it from the right angle. The universe does not care about individual existence. Stars are born and die. Species evolve and go extinct. Civilizations rise and fall. Against this cosmic backdrop of endless change and ultimate meaninglessness, the persistence of these ancient beings represents a form of defiance. They refuse to accept that their existence is insignificant. They insist on continuing to act, to fight, to matter, even when the universe itself seems indifferent to their struggles. And in this defiance, they mirror something essential about the human experience. And even those among them who are no longer human in any biological sense, we too face a universe that does not care whether we exist or not. We too must find our own reasons to persist, our own purposes to pursue, our own meanings to create in a cosmos that provides no inherent answers to the question of why we should bother. The ancient beings of Warhammer 40,000 have been answering that question for billions of years. Their continued existence is their answer, their defiance made manifest across epochs beyond human comprehension. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the ages. We have traveled together across spans of time that defy easy understanding, explored the lives and fates of beings whose experiences are so far removed from our own that we can barely comprehend them. I hope you have found this exploration of the ancient beings of Warhammer 40,000 enlightening, perhaps even moving in its own dark way. These are not just lore facts to be memorized. They are stories about existence, about purpose, about the price of persistence and the cost of giving up. If you found this content enlightening or entertaining, if it sparked your imagination or deepened your appreciation for the grim darkness of the far future, please consider showing your support by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Your engagement helps bring more content like this to the community, helps justify the hours of research and writing that go into each of these explorations. And your presence here tonight, taking this journey with me through the ages, means more than I can easily express in words. There are always more stories to tell in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, more heroes to celebrate, more villains to examine, more mysteries to explore. The lore runs deeper than any single video can convey, and there are ancient beings and forgotten conflicts and cosmic terrors that we have not even touched upon tonight. If you want to continue exploring this universe with me, if you want to delve deeper into the darkness and discover what waits in the shadows between the stars, then please stay with the channel. There is so much more to discover. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Be kind to one another. Find your own reasons to persist, your own purposes to pursue, your own meanings in a universe that sometimes seems indifferent to our struggles. And remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there are also those who have faced that war for billions of years and still refuse to yield. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Whether they are gods of pure energy feeding upon stellar fire, mechanical shells housing the fragments of ancient consciousnesses, warriors trapped in metal sarcophagi across 10 millennia of warfare, or machines from humanity's lost golden age, wandering alone through a hostile universe, these ancient beings share one common trait. They persist, they endure, they refuse to surrender to the entropy that claims all things in the end. And in that refusal, in that stubborn determination to continue existing, despite everything the universe throws at them, they show us something profound about the nature of life itself. Existence is not given meaning by the universe. It is not justified by cosmic purpose or divine decree. Meaning is something we create through our choices, through our struggles, through our refusal to give up even when giving up would be so much easier. The Satan did not ask to be born in the hearts of ancient stars. The Silent King did not choose to carry the guilt of his people's transformation across 60 million years. Bjorn did not volunteer to spend 10 millennia trapped in a dreadnought sarcophagus. But all of them have made something of their existence, have found purposes to pursue and enemies to fight and reasons to continue. That is what makes them worthy of remembrance. That is what makes their stories worth telling. Good night, dear listeners, and may your own watch endure as long as you wish it to. The darkness of the far future awaits us all, but so too does the dawn of understanding.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.